Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we have a doozy, one of the biggest chapters, the biggest lesson in your book, to say the least, for American history up until this point. We're going to be talking about the Civil War and Reconstruction, the time period that follows after the Civil War. And we got a lot of slides, a lot of pictures, some not so much with writing, but you know the deal. You know the deal by now. All right. Let's get into it. How about I shut up and we just go. We just go. All right. So if this wants to load. Waiting. All right. So yeah, like I said, chapter 2, lesson 2, it in a previous book that I've used before, this was an entire chapter. Now these two ideas, these topics are just one little section. So a lot of stuff to cover. That was your warm up. So objectives. We got a lot of objectives. So we're going to discuss the events that started the Civil War. We're going to analyze the economic and political differences between the North and the South. I think we kind of already know those. We're going to explain key battles. We're going to describe the efforts made during congressional Reconstruction, analyze how the Republican Party drove Reconstruction, and discuss the end of Reconstruction. Wah, wah, wah. All right, so here we are. This is where we're at before the Civil War or during the Civil War. To be honest, blue, free states, red, slave state, or the Confederate States of America. That's where we last left. And then the yellow are the border states who remained loyal to the Union in the North. So, yeah, the South is outnumbered. Now, remember, all these territories, they have popular sovereignty being added to them. So they're not slave, but not free. They're in between. All right, so some advantages. Although the South had a military advantage, the North was more populated with more people. The South had a long history of military colleges. And actually, I think it was like 7 out of the 8 military colleges in the country were in the South. So 22 million people lived in the North compared to 9 million in the South. So the North could easily rally support for the war. The North had important industries, which gave an economic advantage over the South, which you saw in your warm-up. 90% of all factories in the country were in the North. So the trains and just factories, everything was much more connected. So the North could easily supply their troops. The South only had half the amount of railroad tracks and only one line, basically from Chattanooga to Memphis. That's it. The North had control over the national treasury. That's where the national treasury was located in the North. Congress passed the Legal Tender Act, creating a national currency with paper money. Finally, we have paper money. And they were called greenbacks because guess what? $1's green. $1 and a dream. Please don't copyright me. The South, not so hot. They did not fare as well as the North. Most of the states were in debt, tariffs. They couldn't buy bonds. Most bonds are loans from banks. Most banks were small and had little cash in reserve. So just because, say, you have like $1,000 in your bank, it doesn't mean that that bank has $1,000 on hand because they got to loan out a lot more money. Yada. So there's not enough physical cash in these banks. So they themselves can't buy bonds. And the North will blockade southern ports, which will reduce trade, which hurts, again, the South. And the South will try to tax their people, but Southerners refuse to pay them. Oh, taxation. So the start of the war, Lincoln tried his best to hold the Union together and prevent the war. So when he planned to resupply Fort Sumter in South Carolina, Jefferson Davis, new Confederate States of America President Jefferson Davis, was faced with a problem. The toleration of Union troops in the South's most vital harbor was problematic. Firing on a supply ship might start a war. Demanding the surrender of supplies also might. So they demanded in return the surrender of the supplies. The major in charge, Major Anderson, he will refuse. So the South decided to bombard Fort Sumter for 33 hours between April 12th and April 13th, 1861, and war is on. So the first major battle of the Civil War's first battle of Bull Run. It's called, well, it was at the place called Manassas Junction in Virginia. And it's 25 miles away from the capital, Washington, D.C. It started well, and they're going to force the Confederates to retreat, but the tide turned when General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson helped out and defeated the Union forces. So it was a loss for the North. And because of this, Lincoln and the North realized that they would need a large, well-trained army to defeat the South. You're going to see North, N, U, Union, C, Confederacy, S, South. You're going to see that a lot, just letting you know. So a conscription bill only called for about 75,000 Union people to enlist for 3 months. The day after this loss, Lincoln passed the bill to have 500,000 enlist for 3 years. Wow, that's a change. So here's the first. Here's a map of the battle. You know, we love some maps in history. Here's a painting. Here's Stonewall Jackson. Nice beard. So strategy. General Winfield Scott will suggest for the Union, will suggest the blockade of Confederate ports and also to send gunboats down the Mississippi River, cutting the South in two. Since the South would be separated, they would run out of supplies theoretically and surrender. It is called the Anaconda Plan. Basically, you know, an anaconda snake, the way they kill their prey, they constrict them and make them, you know, can't breathe anymore. So some leaders rejected it. How superiors thought it would take too slow and they wanted a quick victory. However, Lincoln will go ahead with this plan. Oops, not that anaconda. This anaconda, yeah. So let's blockade all these ports on the coast and go up Mississippi. Well, the Mississippi River is right here. So go up the Mississippi, cutting off Mississippi River is right here. I don't know geography. So we're going to cut off this side from receiving supplies from here. Chattanooga, I believe, is in North Carolina. So Chattanooga to Memphis, Tennessee, or is Chattanooga in Tennessee? Oh, anyways, their main rail line goes right through here. So that's, yeah. All right, Nolens, New Orleans. So the blockade of southern ports will restrict trade with Europe. Remember, the South heavily traded with European countries, mainly Britain. It worked, but as the war dragged on, Union vessels would be too far spread, too thin to stop blockade runners or fast boats from trading their cotton for military supplies. The Union Navy planned to take New Orleans and gain control of the Mississippi River. A man named David Farragut took command of a combined force of 42 warships and 15,000 men, and they were led by General Benjamin Butler. April 25th, 1862, they arrived. 6 days later, New Orleans was in control of the Union. It is the South's largest city and center of the cotton trade. It was now in the Union's hands. Here's Admiral David Farragut. That's the general version of the Navy. is an admiral. Here's General Benjamin Butler. And pictures, New Orleans, 1862. Okay, war in the West. When we're talking about the West, we're talking like Tennessee, Kentucky, you know, that's the West. Mississippi. So Union General Ulysses S. Grant led a campaign to take the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers. In theory, it would cut Tennessee in half and would provide a river route deep into Confederate territory. And all of Kentucky and most of Tennessee would come under Union control. They planned their next attack on Corinth, Mississippi. They cut off the Confederates' only rail line in Mississippi. Confederate forces, however, surprise attacked Grant's forces.
Aaron Padilla-Lopez, please report to the attendance office. Aaron Padilla-Lopez, please report to the office.
It's called the Battle of Shiloh. The Union will win barely. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Between the numbers average about 20,000 people were killed or wounded. So it's a combination, you know, might be half and half, but on average. So there's General Ulysses S. Grant, future president. Here's Shiloh. Here's a portrait of Shiloh. Important battle. Okay, war in the East. So Lee's force, General Robert E. Lee, you know, from Virginia, will go to the South and support the Confederates. He will meet Union troops under the leadership of General George B. McClellan at Antietam Creek. The Battle of Antietam is the bloodiest one-day battle in American history. Let it be known. Hopefully you memorize that. It might be on your test. 6,000 soldiers died. 7,000 were wounded in one day. It wasn't a clear-cut victory for the North, but they forced Lee to retreat and tuck his tail back to Virginia. It was a very important victory because Britain was on the verge to intervene and recognize the Confederate States of America if the North rejected this mediation. So a lot was riding on this. And with that loss, the South lost its recognition for international support. And it also convinced Lincoln the need to end slavery once and for all. Again, so much has happened leading up over this idea, over the issue of slavery and the institution. Finally, it's like a wake-up call for Lincoln, like, nope, it's now not a war to preserve the Union, but now a war to end slavery. Here's Antietam. Again, we love maps, y'all. We love them. Here's some pictures. Yes, these are actual pictures. They had pictures back then, black and white, dead bodies. Here's the memorial. You can go visit. Okay, the Emancipation Proclamation. So Democrats are going to oppose the end of slavery. Republicans, however, were split. The rising number of Union casualties, they agreed that the end of slavery, ending slavery would have their deaths mean something. There was a cause for their death. This is sad to say. So September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln said he would put in effect the EP, Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, that all enslaved persons in states in rebellion were free. However, that does not address the situation of border states. Okay, the border states, remember that yellow line? What was it? Missouri, Kentucky. Yeah, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. So in order to keep those states loyal to them, because if they just said, let's be honest, they were Southern states. They supported slavery. However, they fought for the Union cause. And if Lincoln said no more slavery, those states would have left the support for the Union and gone to the Confederates, and a whole big old mess could have happened. So since it doesn't address all enslaved persons, just enslaved persons in states of rebellion, those states that seceded from the Union. Yeah, those states. So, like I said, it changed the conflict from preserving the Union to a war for liberation. Freedom. Here's Lincoln's EP. Catch him out on SoundCloud next week. So turning points, big turning points. The battles of Vicksburg and Gettysburg. Vicksburg, Mississippi, it was the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. Grant led an all-out attack on Vicksburg. He attacked 2 times and was unsuccessful both. He decided to cut off food and supplies and put their city under siege. Nothing in, nothing out. The troops were literally on the verge of starvation, so by July 4th, 1863, they surrendered. So Lee is gaining some ground. He's a good strategic general of the Confederacy. And after these small little battles, gaining victories, he's going to grow bolder, take steps. He's going to invade the North at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And Gettysburg's a big city, not a big city, a big turning point, a big battle. July 1st, the Confederate troops pushed the North out of the town. July 2nd, Lee attacked, but Union troops held their ground. July 3rd, the next day, Lee ordered 15,000 troops to assault going up a hill. It's called Pickett's Charge, and 7,000 people were dead in 30 minutes. Now, you might be like, wait, isn't that the bloodiest battle? But remember, Antietam was 6,000 dead, 17,000 wounded. That's a total of 23. So rough estimates, not that many. So Pickett's Charge, big fat failure. Lee failed to break the Union lines. They will retreat back to Virginia. 23,000 Union soldiers dead, 28,000 Confederate soldiers dead. Battle of Gettysburg was clearly a major turning point for the war. Remember, the Union soldiers, they still outnumbered the Confederates. So a huge loss like this, pretty big. 7,000 dead in 30 minutes? Sure. All right, so Lincoln's going to give his Gettysburg Address, which was a dedication to the battlefield for a cemetery. 80 years ago, that speech. Here's again a map. Pickett's Charge. When you go up a hill, it isn't smart because it's strategic to have the higher ground in a battle. And obviously they're going up a hill. They are getting the Confederate soldiers are going up a steep hill, and the Union soldiers only have to shoot down. See what I mean? Another portrait of Gettysburg. Pickett's Charge. A portrait. They probably didn't fight this close. Let's be honest. It's a portrait. All right, so Grant gets Tennessee. Following Vicksburg and Gettysburg, fighting erupted near Chattanooga, a vital Confederate railroad junction. Both sides knew if the Union took Chattanooga, it would lead a path all the way to Atlanta, and Grant was successful. By the spring of 1864, the Union secured Vicksburg, the important port on the Mississippi River, and Chattanooga, the important railroad junction. Jeez, the South is in trouble. It will lead for the entire invasion of Georgia. Lincoln rewarded Grant by giving him the general-in-chief and lieutenant general positions in the Army, something that hadn't happened since the times of George Washington. He was that big of a deal. So now you have Sherman's Trail. So Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, is in charge of invading Atlanta or invading Georgia. And he will give the entire wrath of the Union Army. He will give the South their medicine. So they marched from Chattanooga to Atlanta, and along the way, they will burn railroads, warehouses, mills, factories. Fires will spread quickly. Atlanta was fire-burned, firebombed. A third of Atlanta was destroyed after all is said and done. It is nicknamed Sherman's March to the Sea, and it'll show civilians in the South the true meaning of war and all the horrors that go with it. He destroyed a path from Savannah all the way up to the coast and headed up towards South Carolina. Soldiers burned nearly everything in front of them. And it wasn't just that. Okay. So the horrors of war also include abuse and rape and killing of innocent people. So really a combination of all this, it's going to demoralize civilians. Let's be honest. So they go from Atlanta all the way down to Savannah, and it's like a mile wide. In a month, he burned everything. Everything. Make it count in slavery. So Lincoln was reelected for his good war policies. He saw it as a reflection to fix the problem, ending slavery by amending the Constitution. So January 31st, 1865, the 13th Amendment narrowly passed in the House. It was sent to the states for ratification. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The end of the war. So we're still fighting a war, people. We're still fighting 1865. Sheridan will cut off supplies by taking Petersburg in the Battle of the Five Forks. Lee will withdraw positions that headed west. Sheridan's cavalry got ahead of them at Appomattox Courthouse, and they couldn't resist. So Lee will surrender to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, April 9th, 1865. The war is over. And this is the Confederates surrendering to the Union. All right. So Lincoln, we all know. He gave a speech shortly after the war ended. Advisors warned for him not to go unescorted to go watch a opera show. And he was like, no, I'm going to be fine. However, wasn't. April 14th, John Wilkes Booth will shoot Lincoln in the back of the head at Ford's Theater. Lincoln is the Union's greatest champion. The Union, in the end, the victory saved themselves. It strengthened the federal government. It ended slavery, and it devastated the South socially and economically. However, it still left many questions unanswered, which will lead to our next topic, Reconstruction. So Reconstruction begins. The South, again, was defeated with a devastated economy. Some Southerners were bitter for losing. Other Southerners had a more important struggle of rebuilding their land and lives. So now the president and Congress had to deal with the task of Reconstruction, which is the name for the rebuilding of the country following the Civil War. Loyalty. So December 1863, Lincoln's still alive. Okay, just let you know, Lincoln, we're taking a little step backwards to go a little forward. Okay, so Lincoln will set forth a moderate plan of reunifying the country. It's called the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. Lincoln wanted to reconcile, not punish the South. So he's going to offer amnesty or a pardon to all Southerners who took an oath of loyalty to the U.S. and accepted the Union's proclamations about slavery. Certain Confederate government officials and military officers, however, could not be pardoned. And here's loyalty. Kendrick, my name is Kendrick Lamar. But Lincoln was resisted by a group of Republicans in Congress known as the Radical Republicans, led by a man named Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. They wanted to prevent leaders from the Confederacy from returning to power, period. They wanted the Republican Party to be a powerful institution in the South, and they wanted the federal government to help African Americans achieve political equality by guaranteeing their right to vote in the South. Now, that sounds like a great deal. Lincoln didn't say that, though. But congressional Republicans knew that the abolition of slavery meant that the South would actually have more seats in the House. Why? Well, you might recall something called the 3/5 compromise. Well, now that the South only got, for every 5 slaves, they got 3 votes. Now with slavery abolished and the passage of the 13th Amendment, slaves were all free, and the South was entitled to more seats. So in danger of losing Republican control in Congress, unless Republicans found a way to protect African American voting rights in the South, they were in trouble. So then Congress establishes what's called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, aka the Freedmen's Bureau. It took up the task of feeding and clothing war refugees in the South using surplus supplies. They will issue 30,000 rations a day for over a year, from September 1865 to 1866. FB, the Freedmen's Bureau, helped former enslaved people find work on plantations and negotiated contracts with planters. That is the only thing good from the Freedmen's Bureau, just so you know. Northerners thought former enslaved African Americans should receive the land. Others thought taking the land from plantation owners would violate individual property rights. Declaration of Independence, anyone? So Congress refused to confirm the right of African Americans to own the lands taken from their former plantations and given to African Americans. Congress said, "Nah, we're gonna sidestep that issue." So obviously, we talked about Lincoln dying in the last little bit, last couple 5 minutes. Andrew Johnson, his vice president, succeeds him. He is a Democrat from Tennessee, and he stayed loyal to the Union. Kind of why Tennessee was excluded from Reconstruction. So he believed, just like Lincoln, to have a moderate policy to bring the South back into the Union. So the Restoration Program was offered, which gave pardons to all former citizens of the Confederate States, and it excluded the same persons Lincoln didn't want to have pardons. Like Lincoln, all Southern states had to ratify the 13th Amendment. They couldn't say no. It was no more slavery, nothing of it, nothing of the sort. And by the next congressional session, members, however, would be astonished that Southerners still voted for the former Confederate States of America government leaders to Congress. Even though Lincoln and now Johnson said, no, that couldn't happen, Southerners still did it. Johnson will also be angered that the new state legislatures will pass black codes. Remember slave codes? Well, black codes are kind of the same thing, limiting African American rights. These codes were intended to keep African Americans in the same condition like slavery, give them annual work contracts, and those who were refused for vagrancy were forced into involuntary servitude, etc., etc. So, radicalness, more radicalness. In late 1865, House and Senate leaders created a joint committee on Reconstruction. In March 66, it was passed. They passed an act to override black codes called the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It granted citizenship to all persons born in the United States except natives. It guaranteed the rights to African Americans to own property and that they were to be treated fairly in court. Johnson vetoed it because he thought it to be unconstitutional. Radicals, fearing that this might be overturned in court, introduced the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to all persons in the United States, and no state could deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. It was passed in June 66, sent to the Senate to ratify. It was ratified in 1868. President Johnson attacked it, hoping Northerners to vote out the radical Republicans in Congress. The opposite happened, and Republicans now held a 3-to-1 ratio in Congress. Congress had the enough numbers to override any presidential veto. And that's what happens. So March 67, Congress, now the C has changed. It's not the Confederacy. It's now Congress passed the Military Reconstruction Act, MRA. It'll divide the former Confederate States of America into military districts, except Tennessee, and they will ratify the 14th Amendment in 66. I think that year is off. My bad. Anyways, Union generals will be placed in charge of each district to maintain peace, protect the rights of persons and property. Meanwhile, each former Confederate state had to hold another constitutional convention to come up with a legislature appealing to Congress. They had to give the right to vote to all male citizens, regardless of race, and they had to ratify the 14th Amendment before electing members to Congress. Again, all these stepping stones, trying to eliminate the past so it doesn't repeat. Drama. We love drama. Even though Republicans had enough to override, Johnson could still stall and not enforce laws like Jackson. Knowing this, Congress passed two laws, the Command of the Army Act and Tenure of Office Act. The COTA required all orders from the president to go through the headquarters of the general of the Army, like Ulysses S. Grant. The TOA required the Senate to approve the president's removal of any government official who had been approved by the Senate. So the Senate now has to approve the president saying, I don't like that guy, you're fired. Well, it now had to be approved by the Senate. Well, what do I want to say? Johnson was determined to challenge this. So he's like, they can't do anything. Johnson fired his Secretary of War, who supported the Republicans. 3 days later, the House voted to impeach Johnson, charged with high crimes and misdemeanors in office, going against the Tenure of Office Act. They accused Johnson of breaking the law by not upholding the TOA. Again, it gets voted on in the House. It's put on trial in the Senate. If 2/3 found him guilty, he would be removed from office. But like a certain president we know, the result was 35-19, one vote shy of conviction. So he's impeached, but he didn't leave office. So, election of 1868, Republicans nominated Ulysses S. Grant, the former general of the Union Army. During the campaign, Union troops enabled African Americans to vote in large numbers in the South. As a result, Grant won 6 states in the South, and most of all, the northern states. Congressional Republicans will move quickly to expand Reconstruction programs, noticing the importance of African American suffrage, the right to vote, not suffering. They will pass the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment declared the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And by March 1870, it was ratified by all the states. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, pretty big in this time period. That's our president. All right, so these terms, carpetbaggers and scalawags. So many Northerners traveled to the South during Reconstruction. Some were elected or appointed to office. Some were teachers, nurses, doctors, everything that they thought that they could come and help the South. The Democratic Party, however, called them carpetbaggers because they came in their belongings in a suitcase. They packed up everything they could fit in a suitcase, and it just happened to be that their suitcase was made out of carpet. The other term, scalawags, some Southerners who helped work with Republicans, the Southerners called them scalawags. And that's a Scottish term for a weak, underfed, worthless animal. So next time you want to call your friends weak, call them a scalawag. And here's a picture of a carpetbagger and a scalawag. All right, so there's going to be resistance. Hopefully you've talked about this before or you've heard about this. White Southerners are going to heavily oppose Reconstruction. They're going to organize secret organizations to undermine Republican rule in the South. Called the Ku Klux Klan. It was organized by former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee. Their organization will spread quickly. They will wear hooded white robes. They rode around terrorizing African Americans, white Republicans, carpetbaggers, teachers in African American schools, and others who supported Republican government. Congress will pass Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 1871 to reduce Klan activity. They will arrest over 3,000 members, but they only convicted a few at a time. KKK. Here is a famous political cartoon of the donkey representing the KKK, and they're hanging carpetbaggers. How can you tell they're a carpetbagger? They're from Ohio. Again, Confederacy. Okay, Grant has problems. So he might have been a great general, but his leadership is scandalous. The Republican Party came to question whether making money and selling their influence were beginning to dominate the party. Spoil system. Others argued that economic policies Republicans supported, high tariffs, only favored the rich. Critics known as liberal Republicans will break from the party in 1872, and they will nominate Horace Greeley. Despite the split in the Republican Party, Grant will still win re-election. During his second terms, a series of scandals stained his legacy. It's called the Crisis of 1873. A powerful banking firm declared bankruptcy, put the country in a depression until the end of the decade. In 1874, midterm elections were held, and Democrats won back the majority in the House. So the election of 1877 comes along, and there were 20 votes in heavily disputed, and 19 of them were from southern states controlled by Republicans. Now, it's not said how it was worked out, but the way it worked is why it's called the Compromise of 1877. Historians aren't sure, but these are the conditions. Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South. So now that there's no more federal troops to support African Americans voting in the South, well, now the KKK can do whatever they want, terrorizing African Americans. Okay, so the compromise is the Democrats say, we'll give you your candidate, move out, and we'll give you your candidate. You will win. And that's what happens. So without soldiers to help, Republican governments will collapse in the South, and Reconstruction sadly ends. So for 12 years, it only lasted 12 years. That's Harper's Weekly, Tilden, or Blood. Tilden was there. So basically, you're going to vote for this guy, or I'm going to point this gun at you until you do vote. So voting intimidation was rampant. And now that there's no soldiers to protect, anyone can be coerced to vote how they're supposed to vote. And that's Rutherford B. Hayes is the new president. Look at that beard. All right. That concludes this lecture. I know it was a long one. I'm sorry. And I don't have the book open again. Sure. All right. So sorry about that. I'm never prepared for these. Why? Anyways, we're going to go page 103, your homework, page 103, questions 2 through 4. And yeah, that concludes this lecture. I know it was a long one. I'm sorry. There's just a lot of stuff, a lot of big things. Reconstruction, huge. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, huge. What do you got? The Civil War, hello. Your 8th grade year, in part. End scene. Thank you. Anyways, hopefully you guys did enjoy this lecture. I enjoyed having my screen not share at the beginning. The AC is cranking. So yeah, hopefully you can hear me and it's not ruining the sound quality of this video. But yeah, If you guys did enjoy that, leave a thumbs up or a comment, subscribe, help your boy out, get that watch time. Anyways, stay safe, wash your hands. Peace.